Okay, what up, friendos? Welcome back to what I'm now going to call the Who Asked video game review series. Might even not just be video games, but today, the first episode is going to be Throne and Liberty, because who asked me to review an MMO and do a first impressions of it probably a week after it came out, because everyone's already decided if they're going to play it or if they're not going to play it. I decided I was going to play it after the early access period where people paid money to get access to the game earlier, because I wasn't going to touch the game, to be honest, and then I just thought, you know, why not? And I'm glad I did in a way, because the game's not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but it also has a bunch of problems that we're going to get into. Okay, so this is me from the future. Apparently, for whatever reason, my OBS for like 20 hours of footage reverted to some weird encoder. So unfortunately, all the footage is very blurry whenever there's motion on screen, so it just is what it is. The game actually looks great. It's just unfortunately I can't go back and re-record the footage, so there you go. I did write out a list of pros, middle ground, you know, like double-edged sword points and cons, and I will go through them towards the end, but right now I'm just going to try and like pick off the top of my brain the things that I feel like are most important to when you're starting an MMO and trying to enjoy the game. Important to remember, this is just my opinion. I'm somebody who's played MMOs for a long time, but my thoughts and feelings are going to vary compared to yours, and what I think might be a pro or a con might be, you know, the opposite for you. It depends on what you enjoy. I will give like a brief rundown of what I've currently been enjoying, so you can see like how this game and my feelings towards other games measures up. And in terms of MMOs, I've been playing a lot of old school RuneScape. I've been playing a lot of modern WoW. Recently, before that, I played classic WoW and things like that. And I've basically played every game in the genre. It is what it is. I'm a fan of South Korean MMOs because of the aesthetic and the sense of scale in the world that they do usually. And I don't hate grinders. So that's where I'm coming at this from. Somebody who's played thousands of hours of Black Desert Online, even though it's pay to win and there's a bunch of problems with it. Thousands of hours of Lineage 2 and games like that, Legends of Mer. So the fact that this is like a Korean game and it's overly monetized, probably, we'll get to it, and that it's a grindy game, are not negatives to me, but they might be for you. So that's how I view that stuff. Going into this game, I will just say that it is basically like what you'd expect from a South Korean MMO that's currently not doing well in South Korea. This game is not even in the top 50 games played in South Korean PC Bang data, which means that the game is not, you know, it might not be long for this world based on that, unless they can have like a huge recovery. I've seen some people say, oh, it's because they're now developing focused on the West. I don't see that. This is very, very obviously a to the foundation core Korean MMORPG. And maybe they start, you know, focusing more on like what Western people would enjoy. But just in general, you can't change that overnight, and the game's been failing in Korea for a long time now. So if you are looking to get into this, understand that there's foundational problems with this game, because if there wasn't, the industry, the audience they designed it for would probably be more receptive to it, especially when they're still playing games from 15, 20 years ago and they're getting more numbers than this, because they do typically jump on new games. And if they're good, they will play them, and they'll do like Lost Ark did and do well over there. But this one, they seem to not like very much. So I've not experienced exactly why that is, but just right off the top, the two biggest pros and cons of this game, I'm going to give you the big pro first. The game world is fucking fantastic. It's absolutely great. Everything that goes into the world, I'm talking the technical aspect of how the game runs, with hundreds of people on screen with very little to no lag, no latency issues, instant teleporting around the world, the actual graphics, the aesthetic of armors and things like that within the game, how you feel within the game world, all things relating to actually being in the game and in the world are great. It just is. There's nothing I can really say bad about this. One thing MMOs do really badly, typically, and one thing games generally do poorly, is the sense of scale of your character being in the game world. You'll be stood there and it feels like it's off, like you're not a real-sized human, you're in like kind of like a gamified world. Throne and Liberty fucking nails being in the game world. It feels like you're actually there. It feels like the world was designed around you being in it. It looks great, it feels great. It's just the best aspect of the game by a country mile. The fact that you can walk into an area and just see hundreds of people stood there and you've not got like any loading issues, any ping issues, any FPS issues, at least on my machine, and the fact that it actually looks like those people should be there and it doesn't appear out of place in any way, is is great. It's just like one of the things that I think is underappreciated and typically not focused on as much in Western MMOs. And I really do appreciate it. It's just a fucking fantastic feeling, to be honest. And this extends to like even cities and things. Honestly, I'm not a person who walks around and like takes screenshots or really appreciates what's going on in the background. This game makes you want to. It's just good in that regard. And if you only played this for the leveling experience of 1 to 50, which can be done very quickly, although it took me like 18 hours or something, because I was really taking in other aspects of the game and things. So I could give like a proper first impressions of like the early game and things that you're doing as an average person, not rushing to end game. I'd say for the low cost of free to play, that would be absolutely worth playing if you can get over what I would consider probably the biggest negative to the game, and that is it feels like a mobile game. This is something like a nebulous term that people throw around all the time, like, oh, it feels like a mobile game, but they never usually point to substance. And I will just say, a lot of South Korean MMOs feel like this now because they're designed for cross-play, and they're mobile games as well as PC games or console games. This is not, but it basically comes from a company whose biggest IP right now is Lineage. Throne and Liberty is a Lineage game, and originally it had like autoplay and a bunch of other systems in it that you would expect from a mobile game. And it's essentially modeled off of their already mobile version of this game. And you can just tell, like, everything about, like, the UI, the interface, when you go into it and you're looking at, all these little red dots that are popping up every time you do anything, literally anything in the game, there's, like, 4 red dots pop up in your UI that wants you to open and look at and give you an incremental little good boy point. And then, like, even the way that the dungeons are set up, like, you go to a dungeon, you can do 3 per day, and you have to spend a currency to get the loot at the end of the dungeon, like the actual good loot that you're there for. The upgrading system, the hallmarks of, like, South Korean phone game MMO are all there. There's a zone that you can go in where you spend points to farm, and then there's PvP in that because they love PvP in open world areas because it forces people to whale. Or because essentially whales obviously are going to get the most stuff and they're going to be able to push you out of the spawns and things. World bosses work like this. Loot from bosses works essentially exactly the same as almost any South Korean phone game that you played. And this might sound like it's the craziest turn off ever, and for some people it really will be. And for me, it's kind of like that incremental feeling of when you're doing something and you're like, I like this. Oh, that's a little bit weird. Oh, I like this a little bit less. And then the more you think about it, the less excited you are to continue doing it. And I go back and forth with this on this game because actually playing it and being in the world, I enjoy. And then I'm thinking about it, and the gear and how the auction house system works and things really makes it, a struggle for me to open the game. But when I do open it and I get into it, I play for multiple hours in a row. And I was going to release a video about it after 10 hours of playing, and I did 20 just for first impressions. And that goes to show that when you're actually playing the game and not just thinking about it, it's actually pretty decent. One of the things people are going to bring up is minute-to-minute gameplay. The combat is... the combat's not the greatest, is what I'll say. But it does grow on you a little bit. And once you get used to it, almost like anything else, you might not like something initially, or you might have problems with it. You do kind of get to grips with it, and you do kind of like accept that it is what it is, and there's going to be quirks and certain elements of it that you're probably not the biggest fan of, but you'll work around it and you'll get used to it over time. Just like, cock and ball torture. Eventually, maybe you'll start liking it. Maybe you'll enjoy it a little bit. But essentially, the combat isn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, and it's definitely not as good as what I've seen people say it is. It's basically like a tab target game that pretends to be an action combat game, and the action combat is not good at all. There's a few settings you need to change that make it a little bit more bearable, but overall, in general, I think the combat's not great. It could do with some work, and that's kind of the double-edged sword of almost everything about this game, because movement is exactly the same. Movement has like a long list in my pros here of really cool things about it, like the fact that you can transform into animals, and the fact that actually moving around the world feels good, and there's no lag, there's no load screens, there's no latency, and that's great. But then when you actually come to the minute-to-minute of moving your character around, it just feels off. Like there's no fluidity of like climbing a mountain. Like your character clearly can like fight monsters and wear heavy armor and jump around and do crazy things. But like a hill 1 centimeter too big, you don't jump and grab it and pull yourself up. If there's not a grapple point there, you basically just have to, you know, spam jump at the wall and hope that you can like catch onto a pixel or something to scale it. And maybe that's a design choice, but this is essentially everything. Like the turning circle on your character feels like you're moving an 18-wheeler truck instead of the Lamborghini of what it could be if they worked on this movement a little bit more. And I guess with it being a tab target in a slower paced game, there are pros and cons to that. I don't mind tab target. I'm fine with it as long as it's done well. But the gains that they get from this being tab target, being the traditional holy trinity of tank, healer, DPS, which is a pro in my list, of they do focus on PvE a little bit more traditionally than Korean games do, with there actually being dungeons and that trinity role, it feels like it's kind of an afterthought. It feels like the trinity stuff is there, but it doesn't fit as well as you would hope it would. And maybe if they had like another year or two to like really cook with the movement and the combat and the trinity system, this would be like a really large factor. But it's very clear the game's designed mostly around PvP, and that basically means the PvE does suffer from what I've seen. But the fact that it is there is good. I do like that there is traditional sort of PvE in the game and not just Black Desert running around in a circle, farming brain dead mobs, pressing the same buttons over and over again for hours at a time. I do actually think this is a pro. I just wish that there was more focus on it and it wasn't, you know, such a vapid sort of like element just to be there to have a super huge RNG chance to get like the items that you need, and repeatedly having to do the same small pool of content, spending a currency that makes it feel like it's they're only ever one patch away from that currency being in the cash shop, and completely ruining that aspect of the game for people who aren't going to whale out. Speaking of whaling out, I've got on my list here that the game is one of the more fair free-to-play MMOs, coming at it from the aspect of just playing it and not trying to be the most competitive. Because when you get in and you open the cash shop, there's a distinct lack of convenience there, which is a really good thing. I think I've been pretty vocal in this. You might agree, you might disagree. But I think the pay to win is not my biggest concern in games anymore. As a 33-year-old man, I don't care if somebody's going to like spend $10,000 and get the best gear in the game, because the chances are I wouldn't be competing with the people who have the best gear in the game anyway, because I'm not playing for 16 hours a day and spending all my time in the game, which means even if he didn't pay, somebody else would play way more than me, and they'd just be there anyway. So I don't give a fuck about that, as long as there's either some equalized gear system that I can PvP if I want to, or if there's other stuff I can enjoy. I don't care. What I do care about, and what I think harms games the most, is convenience, or, you know, essentially the design is make something in the game worse to then sell you a solution in the cash shop. The example here that people might be familiar with is inventory slots, is loot pickup pets like in Black Desert Online, costumes to do certain things in Black Desert Online, things of that nature. From what I can tell, there's a distinct lack of this in Throne and Liberty, which basically makes it, other than at the top end of when you're spending the cash shop currency to buy stuff to make your gear better, to make you stronger, which is going to take free-to-play people longer, and therefore definitely is objectively pay to win. Aside from that, it doesn't appear like there's a bunch of barrier for entry, like, oh, you need to buy the subscription, oh, you need to buy this thing, you need to buy that thing. It seems like the floor for paying to win here is basically like the leveling log to get the bunch of rewards and buying the battle pass every month, which you can technically earn from doing some super convoluted system, because it's a traditional, it's a fucking phone game, guys. In terms of like how the auction house works, you have to jump through 750 hoops to be able to sell stuff on the auction house, which then people buy with cash up currency, which the selling point is like, oh, then anyone can get cash up currency and you can earn it. But then obviously it basically incentivizes you, if you get something good, to sell it to a whale who's then going to have better things than you in the game, just so you can buy, you know, the battle pass, or buy something lesser that you wanted that you weren't lucky enough to get. And that's kind of just how the game works. And because the game is very focused on guilds, and the top guilds are going to basically get all the most resources, unless you're like an officer in one of the top guilds, or you're being spoon-fed if you're a content creator or something, which, take content creators' opinions on this game very, very liberally with salt, because a lot of them are in top guilds and therefore playing a completely different game to you. Unless you're in one of those situations, it's going to be a drastically different experience with how you see this game. If you're somebody who just likes to log on and you don't have like a core group you're going to join with, or you're good enough at games to get into one of these big guilds and you can put in that time and effort, the game's going to look very differently to you. And a lot of the things I'm saying are probably going to make a little bit more sense relevance-wise to what you're going to be experiencing. I can't remember if I finished my point there, but either way, the cash up doesn't seem like super egregious, at least for now. This can definitely change, but I don't think they're incentivized to at the moment, because this is like the fairest it's ever going to be. And if people won't play, even when it's as fair as it is, fair in a South Korean MMORPG, you know what I'm saying? It's as fair as it's going to get, typically. If people aren't going to play when that's the case, if they add more monetization to make it worse, the game's fucked. So with the reception of it already in South Korea and the fact that the numbers in the West they're not gangbusters, the numbers are not crazy, it's not New World, peaking at like almost 1 million players. It's a couple 100,000 for a game that is free to play. With the diabolical drop off of things like Lost Ark and New World already, with this having like a much lower ceiling in terms of the numbers it's reached quickly, this can fall off very, very quickly. So they'd be really shooting themselves in the balls if they decided to add a bunch more monetization to something that, that is already kind of a selling point of it being not too crazy. That's a fair few of the pros and the cons. Some of the middle ground stuff that I've got written down here is the combat. The combat is flashy, it looks cool, the visuals are really nice, and this goes as well for like customizing your character and things like that. But at the same time, like the readability and things just isn't all that great. I can imagine it getting way worse and maybe visually tiring as you go on in the game. But in general, like the combat just looks fine. It feels okay if you can get around some of the issues with it and things like that. One thing that I will say is that probably the biggest middle ground point of my playing the game is the timetable system, which, if you don't know, basically there's events in the game, including field bosses, which are essentially world bosses from Black Desert Online or basically any other game, as well as like these little events. The little events are actually really cool and pretty well designed in terms of how they make you feel while you're playing them. As soon as you start the game, within the first probably hour or so, you'll probably get told to do an event where you kill wolves, and you're going to be killing wolves for 20 minutes, which sounds stupid and bad and dumb, but it will be making you compete against everyone else in the zone that's also killing wolves. You collect their tails, you deposit them, and whoever gets the most tails, you get ranked in like a little leaderboard, and you get reward participation based on where you ranked. And the fact that it's making you compete, but not in like a super overtly direct way in terms of like fighting each other or whatever, it just makes you involved in the minigame and makes it fun, and it doesn't seem like it's 20 minutes because you gotta go fast. You're playing Sonic time, and that's cool. The problem is that obviously with the timetable system, this benefits people who can be on when they can be on. If you know a boss is coming up at X time and you can be on, that's cool, that's great. But if you're somebody who can only get on sporadically, if you're somebody who's like a recent father, or somebody who's got like a weird schedule with their job or whatever, there's probably times where you're just not going to get to do certain things. If a boss spawns at, 7, 11, 4, 4, 9 throughout the day or whatever it is, then you can't get on for those specific times and be there for like 30 plus minutes usually, then you're probably just not going to get to do stuff, which basically means that there is content that's gating you if you can't get on at certain times, which is a pro and a con depending on how your life works and how you can play. With that being said, I don't know if I'm doing it wrong, but the field bosses are probably the worst content I've ever seen in a MMORPG ever. They're fucking trash. I might be bad, maybe it's a skill issue. The readability of the abilities that the boss does is terrible. The bosses take fucking forever to kill. And if you're taking like 45 minutes to kill one of these field bosses that's like level 40, and there's like a few dozen people there killing it with you, because essentially what it does is it spawns, portals spawn, you go in the portals, they have a maximum amount of people. You're incentivized to go in with your guild, obviously, so you've got the most people possible. And then the loot drops based on guild participation. So if you're not in a guild, chances of you getting something is basically fucking zero anyway, or very close to it. But maybe you'll get lucky, maybe you'll get something. If you don't, I did one yesterday, and this is while I was leveling, so I was only like level 30 something. The boss took 45 minutes to kill, and I got basically nothing from it. It wasn't fun in any way. It was just mind numbing, just pressing my buttons over and over again, stood in front of a bullet sponge. It was bad content. It was really, really bad content. Maybe this again is a skill issue, but if that's the case, that's a game issue in terms of it didn't, explain anything. There wasn't any barrier for me getting in there. There wasn't any organization or anything like that. This is an issue other people are going to run into as well. Maybe it'll get better once other people get gear and they kill it faster, but you will probably run into this problem, and it's just bad. It honestly, the way that this worked was I did some of the events, felt that they were really cool, enjoyed them a lot, turned the game on to stream it to my brother and my friends on Discord, and was like, oh yeah, this is my first time doing a boss, it's going to be cool hopefully. And then went in there and I felt like, when you show somebody a video you thought was really fun and really, really interesting, and then they, you're expecting them to laugh and you're looking at them expectantly and they don't, and you feel like a dickhead. That's how I felt when I showed them this thing, because this boss was fucking, it was bad. It was not a good selling point in the game ever. It looked goofy, it felt goofy, and it's just shit content. And it's designed again around that mobile element of, we want these bosses to basically be contribution based, so the people who spend the most money do the most damage, get the most stuff, and the rich get richer, and it makes everyone else feel like a fucking idiot. And I did feel like an idiot while I was doing it. So there is that. We went over the movement, we went over stuff like that. Customization of your character is a double-edged sword, because while there is a lot of it and you can basically make like interesting decisions and things, the game does deceptively sort of lock you into decisions whereby if you make a mistake and you don't rectify that mistake very quickly, you're essentially playing catch up all the time, and then you're putting yourself behind other people who know more than you. You're kind of at like an information gap anyway, because people have played this game in Korea. It's one of the things I hate about MMOs. The game comes out and there's already a million hours of guides of people who played the game in another region. You speedrun everything, they get everything faster than you, they know everything more than you, and then you feel like an idiot, especially when the game punishes you for that. It's fine if you're into that sort of thing. I typically am. It's not a big problem for me, but it does feel like essentially after playing the game for 20 hours, if you want to change, there are essentially things you can buy, transfer over your progress, and the game has given you them throughout the leveling process in case you made a mistake. It's probably not as punishing for you if you decide very early on, but the fact that you are kind of locked into this, and you might feel gimped if you didn't read or watch guides before you started, is, going to be an issue for some people. It's kind of a problem with games like Path of Exile and stuff, where you don't know what you don't know. Like you're unaware of the actual information gap and things like that. This goes for the gearing as well, which this is not a middle ground point. I think this firmly fits in my cons list. The gearing in this game is what I hate about South Korean MMOs in general, and what I hate about MMOs in general, because World of Warcraft retail is kind of like this now, where there's like a million currencies and things like that. If you combine the user interface, the GUI, whatever you want to call it, in Throne and Liberty to games from sort of like 10 years ago, you're going to see what I mean, that there's just a bunch of stuff. It's constantly screaming at you. It constantly wants you to open stuff. And then you have just like a million items in your inventory that the game constantly bombards you with, that you're not entirely sure of what they do. You're not sure where they go. You're not sure how best to use them. And the gearing is kind of the same thing. It kind of throws you in the deep end of not knowing what the fuck's going on. But I think my biggest issue with these games always is going to be that the game wants you to essentially have like, maybe there's 100 pieces of gear in the whole game. Maybe that's a low estimate. Maybe it's not. But basically it wants you to just smash these pieces of gear together, extract traits from them, and like always have the same pieces of gear till you move up a tier, and then you'll basically have that tier of gear till you move up another one. And it feels like there's just a distinct lack of like progressive feeling. And maybe you'll completely disagree with this. It's just a feeling that I get. It's not an objective thing. It's not something I can really pin the tail on the donkey, so to speak. But I just feel when I'm playing these games where it's constantly like, oh, you got a piece of gear that's exactly the same. It's just a green, it's a green sword, and then you got another green sword and it's the same thing. And then, you move on and you get a blue sword and you feel like, oh yeah, cool, I got a blue sword. And then there's a purple sword. It doesn't feel all that exciting. And when you combine the fact that you're getting gear very sporadically, and the actual rare stuff is stuff that you're probably not ever going to see drop yourself because guilds are getting it and things like that, and you've got to be very lucky to get them to drop in the first place, it just makes the whole gearing and like inventory system feel poor. It just doesn't feel fun, in my opinion. I like MMOs to be like ARPGs when you're just getting a bunch of stuff, but you know that like you have a decision on whether you want to use the stuff or not, and it's varied and it's interesting. I don't feel like that's the case with this, but you know, maybe I'm just wrong and didn't experience it. I feel like the reason South Korean MMOs typically do this and phone games do this very, very often is to have a bunch of actual currencies and things, so that you don't notice what you're using and everything has like a different value in your brain. And they usually do that for a cash shop reason. And obviously that's like a big red flag when the game feels and looks kind of like an MMO. And you'll know what I mean if you've ever played I've been forced essentially to play some phone MMOs, South Korean phone MMOs in particular, when I've been sponsored for a video. And I'm telling you, if you've ever played one of those, compare the user interface and like the systems in this game, and it feels, you know, you're going to have deja vu. I will wrap this up now, and I will just say that the biggest negative with this game is going to be the perception. A lot of people right now are having like the honeymoon phase. If you go on Reddit, if you go on Twitter, if you go on whatever else, people are going to be saying like, oh, you know, I don't know what people were complaining about. I'm having a lot of fun. And to be honest, the game is fun. If you can get past the combat, if you can get past the dreaded feeling that something's wrong and that, you know, eventually something's going to make you quit the game, which all games do. You don't play any game forever. If you can get over that, you can have some fun with this, especially for the low cost of fucking nothing. It's not egregiously monetized, at least for you trying the game out originally. And it's not a terrible game from like the perspective of just playing it as a game and not trying to treat it as if something, you know, you're going to retire in, which I think people do too often with games in general. You can enjoy this for the time it takes to get from point A to point Z, and any time you play after that is just gravy. I think it's fine. The issue is that if you are looking at an MMO like a investment of time, which I do think is a little bit odd, but at the same time I understand, this game has a lot of big question marks about where it's going, where it's headed, because we can see from data that this game is not well received in Korea. And that means that the audience that this game was designed for doesn't like it, which means you can argue that there are outliers. There are examples of games that have come out that a region didn't fuck with, a region didn't like, and then another one really did. That's fine. I just think with this, it's probably not going to be one of those outliers. With that being the case, do I think they're going to abandon it very quickly? Probably not, because the game is doing good numbers right now. But at the same time, there must be something. It feels like there's a lack of content in the game in the first place, unless you're somebody who's going to be doing the end game PvP like the Guild Wars and stuff like that. And from my experience, that's a very small percentage of the actual population that play games like this. I don't think if you're a PvE player or a life skiller, this game has enough to keep you in it compared to its counterparts. Because as I always say, you're not just competing with, you know, other similar games. You're competing with all forms of media when you release something, whether it's a YouTube video, a book, or a video game or a TV show, whatever it is. You're competing with everything. And if you're a PvEer, if you're a dungeon player, if you're a raid player, if you're a farmer, if you want to go pick flowers, if you want to go, decorate a house or whatever, there's a million other games that do everything better than this game does. So unless you're somebody who just fits into this mold of all the little things that this does and have a big PvP focus, this game's probably not going to be a long-term one for you, which is probably a reason why it's failed in South Korea, because there's games that just do what the core premise of being a big PvP game does, but better than Throne and Liberty, already out, that's already popular in the South Korean market. So with that being the case, would I recommend you play Throne and Liberty off of the first impressions? It depends, really. Do you value your time? Do you want everything to be like a big investment and to know that, 5 years later you're going to still be playing the game, or you're going to come back to it and it's going to have had 5 years of updates and your account's going to be waiting for you? Probably not. There's content planned for this game for the future. They're probably going to still continue maintaining the game. I don't think it's going to go anywhere in the very short term. But with that being said, there are just games that do what this game does, but better. The only thing this game does better than its contemporaries are basically the world and the technical aspect, which is very impressive, and I wish was a standard for the MMO industry. And it's a shame that the games that we get come out that are really impressive in this way are usually ones that are like sort of like a short-term vapid experience that go away for most people after a couple of weeks or a couple of months. But with that being the case, I would recommend, as a free-to-play game, if you want to just kill some time and have a little bit of fun with something that you don't have to marry, then, you know, Throwing Liberty is fine. I just wouldn't... I don't hate the game, I don't love the game. It's just kind of like, I'll log in after this video is posted probably and play for another couple hours, but will I still be playing it in a week's time or in a month's time? Probably not, if I had to guess. If you want to see like a full review, I know this is already a long review and probably a little bit meandering. You know, we've went on a bit of a beaten path around a long winding road. Let me know in the comments, because if I do continue playing, maybe, you know, I'll do some of the more end game stuff and do some of the PvP and then really change my tune and say that this is a fantastic or a terrible game. But with that being the case, thank you very much for watching as always. Hopefully you enjoyed, and if you want to see stuff like this in the future, I've got a bunch of videos planned that are for older games that I played recently or whatever, that I might just release as reviews, because whatever, I might as well, right, if I've already played it and I've already recorded the video. And maybe the Who Asked video review series will continue, but it is what it is. Hopefully you enjoyed. But there we go. Let me know what you think. If you played the game, if you don't want to play the game, just let me know in the comments. Let me know what type of content you want to see. Do you want to see more reviews? Do you want to see more laughing at crypto bros? Suggest me stuff if you got anything in mind. And yeah, thanks for watching. Go buy GameStops, link in the video description, 10% discount code for you. I get a kickback and appreciate you all as usual. See you next time. Peace.